The gal gave her a bottled water, then started cleaning up one hand and then the other. The long, heavy flannel had prevented her from getting cut up from the beating, but she had at least a dozen bruises between both arms. Now that she had time to somewhat relax, she did feel several bruises on her ribs and several more on her legs as she wiggled them, noting that nothing that some sleep wouldn't take care of. She also had some acetaminophen in her first aid kit in the truck. That helped a little bit, as well as to keep the swelling down too bad. I'm afraid there isn't much else we can help with, sweetie. Drone Girl immediately thanked her for her kindness and hospitality as her mind worked in parallel. I actually need a place to stay, a safe place to stay. I don't handle that, but I can put in a good word for you. How's that sound? I'd be much obliged. Thank you so much. Drone Girl smiled as enthusiastically as she possibly could, given the levels of pain she was realizing she was in. Go hang out in your truck a little bit. Let me talk to them. Drone Girl smiled and nodded, thanking the lady again for her hospitality and kindness. She went to her truck and started digging around for some ham technology she knew was in there somewhere. In a little time, she found a radio, some cords, and a booklet and local ham people put out with all the repeater information. The information overlaid with her paper maps well, and she set it on the passenger seat as she sat back down to the driver's seat. Drone Girl undid the antenna from the radio and then took out the cords she got. She put one end into the radio, another end into her cab unit, essentially making one of the radios on her truck ham capable. Drone Girl took another cord and plugged one end into the electrical port on her console and shook the battery out of the ham radio and plugged it into the other end, which looked like a battery interface on the radio. Drone Girl flicked the knob and the radio turned right on. It was in a different language, but within a few minutes she had it on the right language and had it started programming in repeater numbers. Normally she would need a license to use these, but it was okay to listen. Also, Drone Girl thought this was starting to seem like one of those emergencies where it was okay to use ham. Sure, most people can't magically pick up a ham radio and expect it to work, but Drone Girl had an electrical background and frequently used her CB, which gave her advantages in both usability and etiquette. Drone Girl had input a few repeater frequencies when there was a knock at her truck door. She looked down and a few guys were out there with rifles. They didn't look threatening, though. She poked her head up to the glass and knocked on it, smiled, and waved down at them. They all backed up so she wouldn't smack them in the face with her door, and she hopped out to see what they wanted to talk about. They all introduced themselves. Drone Girl wasn't good at remembering names, but I think there was definitely a Dave, Mike, Bob, or a Rob. She smiled politely and bobbed her head as they talked. We want to give you a place to crash that's safe. We'd hate for more bad things to happen to you. We simply want to have a quick talk with you about skills and what's in the back of that rig of yours to make sure you're a good fit. Drone Girl completely understood. She imagined they thought of some sort of Trojan horse where it could be full of bad guys. Everyone seemed to be on hyper alert. Sure, in respect to full disclosure and trust, I'll show you what's in the bag. Please do not think I stole all of this. The equipment is part of the business that I run. One of them raised their hands as if to ward off any potential thought that they may be evaluating or judging her. She nodded and realized she was rambling. She speed walked to the back and waved her hand over a heavy magnetic lock, and it immediately unlatched. Drone Girl opened the door slowly, and all men got in defensive postures. One got out a flashlight, and the rest had rifles at the ready. She opened one door slowly, and then the other. The men peered in. It was an overcast day, like every day in the winter in the Pacific Northwest, so they were able to see inside relatively well, even without the light. It was maybe a 25-foot trailer container, so not much room for a small army to hide in with the amount of electronics she had in there. There was also now a heavy aroma of coffee. The fuel was not detectable at all, despite her having 8 5-gallon fuel tanks in the back along the walls where the doors opened. The fuel cans were built to military spec. As long as the temperature stayed regulated, which it did in the container, they never leaked even a small amount of odor. The cans also relieved pressure in a way to where the fuel didn't spray everywhere when she needed to open a can. Spending a few more dollars and hunting down the right cans had been a huge investment. The fuel was seemingly all but ignored, and probably without thinking, one of them said, "Coffee?" A few more grumbled as if they'd been without coffee for too long, which was probably only a few hours, but still could feel like forever if you'd been up all night, and they probably had. Drone Girl hopped in the container of her truck as if what they said was an invitation. She got to the other side of her electronics, into the sleeper cab, and threw out a full-gallon bag of prepackaged coffee beans. She hadn't realized the smell due to the shock and acclimation. She must have reeked of coffee and not even realized it, having been desensitized to the smell throughout her journey. "How many of these bags you got in there?" He held up a bag of French roast and waggled it at her. It made a little rustling noise as if to make a point of its own. The electronics and fuel cans must be nice to them, Drone Girl thought to herself. Enough. I confess I did liberate these from a grocery store earlier on the way due to the opportunity presenting itself. The electronics are all mine, though. I'm something of an amateur electrical engineer specializing in drones. They looked at her, trying not to chuckle, as if drones were something that they should care about, but don't. Well, not sure what to think about drones, but a few more bags of coffee, and I think you're going to have a lot of friends around here. The reluctant leader waved around as if there was tons of people around needing coffee. She smiled. Lucky for Drone Girl, she had plenty of coffee, close to 40 one-gallon bags, in fact, enough to last a small army half a year. She'd packed the coffee bags tight in the shopping cart and was able to stack it 2 solid coffee bags high, with the beginnings of a third row on top. There were several more in the child's seat, with a flip-up lid covering the footholes. And more under the base of the cart. Where do you want the coffee? You want it here or somewhere else? There's another store you'll pass on the way. We'll have someone ride with you, and we'll stop there and help you offload it. From out here, of course. They wanted to make sure they weren't invading her space so much it'd make her feel uncomfortable. In fact, all things considered, they were being quite gentlemanly. Drone Girl felt very safe here. They gave her a set of frequencies and one local channel for the convoy. Told her to stay on 1 watt for it so it didn't blast out too far. She understood that, plugged in the channel into her handheld, did a quick test, and away they went. The drive was a few miles deeper in the hills out of their tiny town. There were several checkpoints they had to go past. Each checkpoint looked like it was ran by a different group, as if every neighborhood took responsibility for a different choke point. Drone Girl was surprised that they had gone up this fast, but after all, if you don't get them up immediately, someone else will. Yeah. You might not always like who that is. If law enforcement sees you taking care of things, they're more apt to leave you alone if you aren't in their way. Rural areas, anyway. She passed 2 checkpoints and drove by a third, a Grange, and then a corner store way up in the hills. Drone Girl had glossed over the finer details, but it looked like one of the checkpoints had a few pretty fancy assault rifles along with their hunting rifles. The lead driver had been telling her step-by-step instructions all the way, so nothing was a surprise. They got to the coffee store, and he instructed her to pull up over into the parking lot. If there was some kind of trap to be sprung, it would probably be sprung on her here. Instead, the shopkeeper was already outside, armed with a shotgun slung over his shoulder and a shopping cart. A younger boy was there to help him, with a lower caliber-looking rifle also slung over his shoulder. A big, curved magazine came out of it. "You got coffee?" he jovially remarked at her from his shop. She let the truck idle, no use in turning it on and off. Drone Girl left it off at the grocer's to not spook anyone. She'd leave it idling now. Seemed only appropriate. She rolled down the passenger window a bit and yelled out, "Yeah, I got coffee here for you. 1 second, I'll start tossing it out." She pivoted her chair over and started tossing bags out the side one at a time. The kid was having a fun time trying to catch the bags, handing them to the older gentleman and putting them in the cart. She kept tossing and tossing more bags of coffee until they yelled at her to stop. "Hang on a second, gal. Gotta offload these. Cart's not that big, you know." Drone Girl shuffled the rest of the coffee bags to the front of the cab so she would be ready. The 2 shopkeepers came back in a minute, and they were close enough to where she could drop them out one at a time instead of tossing them. Upon completion, she hopped out. It had been sprinkling and was chilly, but besides that, it was turning out to be a nice day. She stepped around some puddles and followed the shopkeepers in. Her truck detected she was walking away, but had her keys with her, so the truck locked itself. It idled happily to itself as cool rain droplets came down. Inside the store, Drone Girl got a better idea of what the place was. It was a corner store. The general store was apparently in town next to the grocer and the gun store, and the two younger, the clerks explained. They seemed to be trusting enough, and Drone Girl didn't feel like there was going to be a trap at all. She refused to relax, though, waiting to meet as many people as she could. She looked outside and saw some Viking-looking guys and a guy in a pickup truck head out. "Vikings?" she said out loud, without thinking.